Professor,
Yes.
I have a question. Is the homework due today or?
What does it say on the titanium? I think it says this October 2nd, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Homework 2, right?
Yeah.
It said it's due today.
No, there is another. There should be. I think I've extended it for a couple of days. So it should show the extension there.
It says Tuesday, September 29th, 2020, 12 a.m.
That's what it says?
Yeah.
Well, then that's exactly when it's due. If it says that, because I thought that I changed the dates and I did save the updates, but I don't know why it's doing that. If it says that, then you simply have to go according to what you see there.
Are you going to go over the homework in class?
Yeah. Yeah, I will. Any other questions before we start?
Did you mean to have the homework due at 11:59 tonight or last night at midnight?
Oh, tonight. No, tonight, 11:59.
Okay, so the way it's set up is we're already late if we haven't turned it in. So it was 12 o'clock last night.
Yeah.
No, don't worry about that.
Okay.
I will make the changes if that's the case. Don't worry about it. Just submit it.
So today, due date is today by 11:59.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Any other questions?
And the same goes for the rough draft for the paper, right? Due tonight?
It tells you, no, it tells you the date also on that.
I didn't see any date. Where's that?
It just said the 29th, but naturally doesn't give a time.
Oh, no, you have a couple of days left. So you have up to October 2nd.
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah. Do you see the date now?
No, where would I look at it?
It's on titanium. You know, when you go to submit the writing assignment, it says when the due date is.
No, mine says nothing at all. It doesn't have a date or anything.
So then, yeah, you have a couple of days. You can submit it by the October 2nd.
Yeah, mine doesn't give a date too.
Doesn't?
I didn't even know we had to start an assignment, writing one.
Same.
Yeah, we do have. If you go back to your syllabus, and also if you go back to the writing assignment on titanium instructions, it tells you exactly when the due date is and what you have to do and what the paper is about. All that information is given to you. So if you go to titanium under announcements, go to writing assignment under announcement. You will see all the instructions there.
Okay. I see the writing assignment part now. Yeah, there's no date to turn it in, so I didn't realize that it was even upcoming.
Yeah, no, there is a date. I don't know. I have to go back and check why it's not showing, because on my part it is showing. So I need to know why on your part it's not showing.
Yeah, I see the writing assignment instructions and announcements, but I don't see the due date.
Yeah, I have to. I have to check and see why that is.
I think the due date isn't until like the final around that time. It's just a draft that if you want to turn it in earlier, it's due earlier.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wait, do we have to turn a draft in?
You don't have to, as I said before, and it's in your syllabus, it's mentioned in your syllabus, and it's mentioned in the instructions. Did you read the instructions on the writing assignment? I think you need to read the instructions on the writing. It tells you that if you decide to write.
Yeah, I just found out about it.
Yeah, Exactly. So, you know, everything is there. Everything is in the instructions to the writing assignment. So it's up to you. You know, you have an option. If you want, you could submit the final draft by the end of the semester during the final exam. Or if you would like to get some feedbacks, then what you need to do is you need to submit an initial draft by the stated due date. And, you know, I'll give you feedbacks on that. And if you incorporate all the feedbacks, you can get up to 10 percentage point extra. So let's say you got a 60% now with the feedbacks on the draft. And if you incorporate them, you're going to get, or you will end up with a 70%. And if you get an 80% on the initial, then, you know, you can expect to see a 90%, etc. So it can give you up to 10 percentage point increase in your score. That's what it is. Now, a lot of students have, from my experience, have opted out of the first draft, of the initial draft, for the simple reason because they felt it's time consuming, and then, you know, it's only going to add 10 percentage points. So, you know, why do I want to go through that? And some, you know, have submitted drafts and, you know, they got an 80% in the initial and they ended up with a 90%. Yeah, is there another question? I guess not. Okay. So let's start today. And I guess what I need to do today is finish with the transportation cost model. And once we do that, then we will start with chapter 4. Okay, so as far as the transportation cost model, remember last time what I said? I said that when you include transportation costs into the trade model, this will affect trade in several ways. Number one, it will affect the volume of trade. It will reduce the volume of trade. It will reduce imports. It will reduce exports. It will affect the price of the product. Now, instead of having one single price, transportation cost will lead to two different prices, one for the exporting country and one for the importing country. In other words, transportation costs will cause a wedge between the price that the exporting country will charge and the price the importing country will have to pay. So the differences between those prices will be the transportation costs. Therefore, under transportation costs, we can never have a single price. It will not exist. And then what transportation costs would do is that it will affect the extent of specialization. In other words, if a country happens to have a competitive advantage in producing a product, once you introduce transportation costs, that country now will be forced to produce less of the good that they have a competitive advantage in. Therefore, the extent of specialization will be reduced. The other thing that transportation costs will do is that it will affect consumption and production for both countries, the exporting country and the importing country. All of this you don't have to memorize. All of these results can be seen very clearly from your graphs of demand and supply. So let us start with the simple example, transportation costs. We have two countries, the US and Canada, and we have one product that these two countries will be trading, which is automobiles. We will have a demand and supply curve for Canada demand and supply curve for the US regarding autos. So first, let's look at the model without transportation costs. Let's see what will happen to trade when there are no transportation costs. First, we need to determine where the autarky positions are for each country. In other words, we want to know what the autarky price is for each country. And then we want to determine which country has the competitive advantage, because after all, we want to know who will be doing the exporting and who will be doing the importing. So those are the first two things that we want to do. Once we do that, then everything else will fall in place. Okay, let's look at the autarky position for the US. Now, one thing here to note is that the demand and supply curves for Canada are drawn differently from the supply and demand curves for the US. And the reason is simply because of what we are doing on the x-axis. So if you look at Canada, for example, the x-axis are normal axes. In other words, they go from 0 to the right, you're getting positive numbers as you go to the right of 0. But for the US, what you have is you have the reverse. You have 0, the origin, and then in order to get to positive numbers, you're not moving to the right, but instead you're moving to the left. Everyone sees that?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so that's the reason why in Canada, the demand curve is normal. In other words, it's sloping downward as it should be. The supply curve also is normal. It is sloping upward as it should be. But for the US, the opposite is going to happen. The demand curve is going to be sloping upward. The supply curve is going to be sloping downward. And the reason is simply because of the way we're measuring the quantities on the x-axis. That's not something difficult to understand. Anyway, so now let's look at the autarky position for the US. The autarky price and quantities are determined by the intersection of supply and demand. So for the US, the autarky price happens to be $4, and the quantity produced and consumed happens to be 4 units. These are measured in thousands, so I'm not going to talk in thousands. I'm just going to talk in units, make it easier. Okay, everyone follow so far?
Yes.
Okay. Now we come to Canada. We do the same thing. We want to find the autarky price. So the autarky price is determined by where the demand and supply curves for Canada intersect, which is at $8 and 4 units. So now I know that the US has a competitive advantage in auto. Why? Why does the US have a competitive advantage?
Has a lower price.
Very good, has a lower price. Can produce it at $4. Canada can only produce it at 8. So obviously the US has an advantage. Therefore, the US is going to be specializing more in the production of autos and exporting autos to Canada. Okay, the next thing. So now we have determined the autarky prices. We have determined where competitive advantage lies. And we have determined the pattern of trade. In other words, the US will export autos, Canada would import autos. Okay. The next thing is what will the world price be? Anyone? The world price is going to be between $4 and $8. That's what we have been saying all along, right? When we looked at the Ricardo model and when we looked at the HO model. World prices will be determined in exactly the same way. The world price has to be somewhere between the two opportunity costs. This is the opportunity cost for producing autos in the US. This is the opportunity cost for producing autos in Canada. Therefore, the world price has to be between 4 and 8. Where exactly? Remember before, we used to say we're
Six.
gonna, yeah, 6. I will come to that in just a minute. But remember what we used to say before. Before we used to say we have to pick a number between these two arbitrarily. Now we cannot pick a number arbitrarily anymore. You know why? Why is that?
Is it because we have to account for transportation costs?
No. Here we're not talking about transportation costs. Here we're dealing with a model without transportation costs.
Because both countries are producing cars?
No. Because now we have information on the demand side. We're given the demand for each country. Before, we were only given information on supply. That's the reason why we had to arbitrarily choose a number. But now we have information on both sides. So now I don't have to rely on arbitrary numbers. Now my demand and supply model would tell me exactly where the international price is going to be. Now, a few minutes ago, someone said, a student said that the new world price is going to be 6, and you're absolutely correct. But do you know why? Why did you choose 6? Why?
Because at a 6, one country will export 4 units of the auto, and the other country will import 4 units and make it even.
Very good. That's the main answer here. In other words, you gotta pick a price that is consistent with both countries' excess demand and excess supply. If you find that at that price, excess supply in the US is exactly equal to excess demand in Canada, which means exports is equal to imports, which means you have trade equilibrium, then you have selected the right price. But if I choose a price between 8 and 4, that will result in exports and imports not being equal, or in trade not being in equilibrium, then I know I have not selected the right price. Is this clear?
Yes.
Very good. So no questions. So far, so good. Okay. So now I can see exactly what the exports are when the price is 6 for the US, because when the price is 6, the US will produce 6 automobiles and will consume 2 automobiles. Purchase 2. They will produce 6, purchase 2 locally, so they will have a difference of 4. That is known as excess supply, which is the US exports. They will export those 4 units.
Professor,
Yes.
could it also be looked at as like using one country's surplus to treat another country's shortage, even though we're not using ceilings or floors?
Yeah, it's exactly, that means the same thing. Surplus and shortage, they mean the same thing. Surplus here refers to exports, shortage, imports. So they mean exactly the same. Okay. Now let's go to, now we already know that the US will be exporting 4 units. Why? Because at price of 6, that would be exactly equal to excess supply, 4, which means the US will export 4 units. Now let's come to Canada. At the price of 6, how much will be consumed in Canada when the price is 6? Come on, anyone, very quickly.
The same.
What's that? I said, I repeat my question. When the price is $6, how many units will be consumed in Canada?
2.
Like just under
No,
6,
the
right?
consume is 6. Consume is
Five.
6.
6.
5 point something, right?
Consume is 6.
6, correct, it's 6. Yeah, this 6 should be right here. I guess, there's a misprint, but it should be right there. So they should consume 6. Okay, when the price is 6, how much will Canada produce?
2.
Therefore, we have a shortage, right?
Yes.
Or we have excess demand. What's that shortage or excess demand equal to?
They will need 4 more.
4. So the excess demand is equal to 4. Therefore, my imports are equal to 4. So imports of 4 is equal to exports of 4. So I know I have trade equilibrium. And as a result, I can go to sleep very comfortably saying that the world price is going to be $6. Is this understood by everyone? How we got that 6? This is the time to ask questions. If you don't ask questions now, I assume that you know everything and I'm gonna keep going, basically.
Well, okay, so I do have a question, but I think it's more of like maybe I just need like some clarification. Because when I was reading the book, from my understanding, like the reason why it was 6 was like, because like, I just like maybe me like telling you this will help me understand better, but like the reason why it was 6 is because it was like directly in the middle of like 8 and 4, right? And then like when you add the transportation, it like inserts that buffer, or is that like completely just like
No.
off
no.
topic?
Yeah, that's not the way to
Cool.
look at it. Just in this case, it seems that it is very consistent, but it won't
Yeah.
always be, okay?
Okay.
It won't always be. The only way to do it is simply to find out which price will bring trade equilibrium.
Got it.
By
Okay.
trade equilibrium, we simply mean that the exports of one country must
the
be
imports.
exactly equal to the imports of the other country. Once you have that, then you can be assured that you got the right world price. Okay? So now we have seen exactly what's going to happen in as far as world trade with no transportation costs. We pretty much have everything under control now. Now let's go to the other graph that shows what happens to trade once we introduce transportation costs. And we are told here that our transportation costs are going to be $2,000 per auto. So let's say $2 per auto. Since here we're dealing with single numbers and not thousands, so we will do the same. Let's say $2. Okay, now, exactly the same demand and supply curve for both countries, nothing changes. The only thing that now will change is whatever price the US uses to charge for its exports, Canada must take that price and add to it the transportation cost. Now, first of all, we know that prices are going to be somewhere between 8 and 4. In other words, it has to be greater than 4 and it has to be less than 8 if trade is to take place. We know that. There's nothing we can do to change that equation. So the equation is given to us that I can't go to 8 and I can't go to 4. So in order for trade to take place with and without transportation, I have to be somewhere between those two numbers. Now, without transportation, we said that the world price was set at $6. Correct? Everyone agrees?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's say the US says, okay, the world price is 6. I'm going to keep on charging the same price as before. And let Canada worry about what they need to do about their transportation costs. I'm not interested in transportation. I'm sending this merchandise to Canada. Canada will have to pay all the transportation costs, so let them deal with it. I'm going to stick with this price. Do you think this would work?
No,
No, why?
because it's too expensive. Canada won't buy it.
Why would Canada not buy it? What would be the price that Canada has to pay?
Maximum it's 8.
Yeah, but now when the US chooses a $6 price, how much would Canada pay?
7.
8.
8, very good. If the US charges $6, Canada must charge 8. Why? Because we said the transportation cost is $2. So you always have to add the transportation cost to whatever price the exporting country chooses. So I said, let's assume, I just gave you this out. We don't know if it's going to work or not, but we said, hey, let's give it a shot. The US wants to charge $6. If the US charges $6, then Canada must charge 8. If Canada has to charge $8, will this make it beneficial for Canada to engage in trade? Answer, anyone?
No.
No. Why? Because the autarky price of Canada is $8. So why would I want to go through all the headaches and the expense of buying goods from the US when they're going to be exactly the same as my autarky price? I might as well put my domestic firms to work and produce these goods instead of importing them from the US. Does everyone follow? Does this make sense? Anyone, any questions so far? Therefore, the price of $6 will not prevail after including transportation costs. So the US will quickly realize this and say, oops, we made a mistake. We really drove Canada out of trade, and we can't afford that. So let's do something else. Let's adjust our price, and let's go to 550. So if the US charges 550, how much will Canada charge?
750.
750, very good. Will this induce Canada to trade?
Yes.
Yes, very good, because it's below $8. So anything below 8 will induce Canada to trade. The question is, will a price of 550 in the US and 750 in Canada result in trade equilibrium? This is what we want to know. If it does, then that would be the price. If it doesn't, then I gotta go back to the drawing board and find the actual price that will lead to trade equilibrium. And your author already did his homework here, and he found that a price of $5 for the US, this will lead the US to produce 5 units and consume 3 units. So they have an excess supply of 2. So the US will export 2 autos. And then they came to Canada and they said, okay, let's see what happens when the price is $7. They found out that at $7, Canada will produce 3 units and Canada will consume 5 units. So there will be an excess demand of 2 units. So will these two prices bring trade equilibrium?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Why? Because at these two prices, exports is exactly equal to imports. The US will export 2 autos, Canada will import 2 autos. And so we will put a full stop to that. This will be your prices as determined by demand and supply.
So are there two world prices then? So it costs the US $5 whatever to produce an auto, and then since the or 5,000 and it's $2,000 more of a cost for transportation. That's why they sell it at 7,000 to Canada.
Yes.
Okay.
Always, when you introduce transportation costs into the trade model, you will always have 2 different prices. The difference between the 2 prices will be transportation costs. In other words, transportation costs will always drive a wedge between the 2 prices. Now, if there were no transportation costs, there would be only one single price. But now, once you introduce transportation costs, you're going to have 2 separate prices. One for the exporting country and one for the importing country. And the difference between them would be the transportation cost. The price that you have chosen in every country must be consistent with trade equilibrium. If they are not consistent with trade equilibrium, then you have to change those prices. And you have to continue to search for the right prices until you achieve trade equilibrium. Is this clear enough? Remember, your understanding of this transportation cost is very important for midterm exams. So in midterm exams, you may have different multiple choice questions, probably 4 or 5, all relegated to the transportation cost. In other words, it would tell you that because of transportation cost, we can never have two different prices. There will only be one price. That's one alternative. The other alternative, with transportation cost, you will always have two different prices. A higher price for the exporting country, a lower price for the importing country. Another alternative. The other alternative would be, as a result of transportation cost, you will have two different prices. A higher price for the importing country, a lower price for the exporting country. As a result of transportation costs, specialization will increase. Specialization will stay the same. Transportation cost has nothing to do with specialization. So, you can have a lot of different answers to these questions, but you got to pick the right one. That's why it's extremely important that you understand the ins and outs of this transportation cost trade model. Is this understood?
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you just say that specialization like isn't affected by transportation costs?
Of course it is.
Or
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
why in the multiple choice, you don't pick that answer.
God, okay. I thought you were saying that like that was like a thing
No,
for a
no,
second.
no.
I was like, wait, I'm
No,
confused, but
no.
okay.
I'm just giving you certain things that you will see in the multiple choice question, but you have to pick the right one. Okay, you always ignore the wrong ones. The wrong ones are irrelevant. That's why I said you need to understand the ins and outs of the transportation cost trade model.
Is the midterm still scheduled for October 20?
Somewhere around there, but I will let you know before we get to it.
And will we be provided with the study guide, or that's our own?
We're going over the things that you need to focus on. So,
Okay.
talk about this type of questions that I have just mentioned right now.
Okay.
Those are
So
the
this is a sneak peek to the exam.
exactly. It's a sneak peek. That's 4 or 5 questions right there.
Okay.
So if you focus on this graph, hey, you got your 5 questions ready. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing now we want to discuss is what's going to happen to consumption, production, and the volume of trade after including the transportation cost. So in this case, what you have to do is you have to compare the consumption and production that takes place in each country when the price is $6, and then compare that with consumption and production in the US when the price is 5, production and consumption in Canada when the price is 7. This way we will be able to determine what happens to consumption, what happens to production, and what happens to the volume of trade once you include transportation costs. Okay, so let's start with the US. At $6, this is trade without transportation. The US was producing 6 units, right? At $6. This is without transportation. Now let's see what happens when there are transportation costs. The US will charge $5. So how much will the US produce now at $5?
5.
5. Previously they were producing 6, now they're producing 5. So what is happening to production in the exporting country?
Decreasing.
Decreases. Very good. Now let's go to consumption. The US is consuming 2. without transportation cost. The US is consuming 3 with transportation costs. So what happens to consumption in the exporting country?
Increases.
Increase.
Increases from 2 to 3. Okay, so this is what these are some of the questions that we were asked. What happens to production? What happens to consumption? And what happens to exports? How much was the US exporting before?
4.
4. How much is the US exporting after?
Only 2.
Only 2. So what can we say about exports?
It went down.
Went down. Okay, so now we're pretty much set in as far as the exporting country is concerned. Now let's go to the importing country. At 6, how much is Canada producing?
2.
2. At 7, how much is Canada producing?
3.
So production in Canada has increased. How about consumption? At 6, Canada is consuming how much?
6.
6. At 7, Canada is consuming how much?
5.
5. So what happened to consumption in Canada? Went down.
Decreasing.
Went down. What happened to production in Canada? Went up. What happened to imports in Canada?
Down.
Went down. So from here, what we can see is that the volume of trade has fallen as measured by exports and imports. We have seen that now we have 2 different prices, one in the exporting country. What happened to the price in exporting country? Did it go down or go up? Come on, it's easy. What happened to the price in the exporting country?
It went down.
Went down from 6 to 5. What happened to the price in the importing country?
It went up.
Up.
Went up from 6 to 7. So this is another answer to the questions that we relayed, and these are the type of questions you will see in the midterm exam. So don't tell me later on after the midterm exam we didn't go over this. I will be disappointed if you say that. If you say, well, you know, Professor, we didn't know this. We didn't go over it in class. I think we did. And anyone with questions, now is the time to ask. Okay. So pretty much, I mean, we covered everything here in as far as prices, as far as consumption, production, imports, exports, volume of trade. And I want to leave it right there, unless there are any questions. Any questions before I scrap this graph?
There's a question on the exam. This is gonna be given, or we're gonna have to grab everything.
No, you don't need. I mean, you can do it on your scrap paper, do your graphs, but you know the graphs will not be given to you. You will just be given questions, and you will be asked to answer those questions. Like, for example, what happens after transportation costs to prices in the importing country versus the exporting country? What happens to production in the importing country? What happens to consumption in the exporting country? What happens to specialization in the exporting country?
Okay, thank you.
And these are the type of questions. But you know, you could draw a graph, and from the graph, you'll be able to determine the answers to all those questions.
I got a question. So like you said, like you asking the question of if adding transportation costs, what happens to the price in importing countries? Is it like just relative to each situation, or is it objectively true that every time you increase or you introduce transportation costs, of the price in the importing country is going to go up? Is that
No,
how that works?
relative to the price that prevails with no transportation costs. So you want to always compare the price that exists after transportation cost with the price that existed without transportation cost. These are the two things you want to compare. Is this clear? In other words, you want to compare free trade with transportation costs. Is this clear?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to leave this and I'm going to bring in a new PowerPoint. Okay. That's fine, I guess. We will, oops. Okay, let's look at this new chapter, chapter 4. This is our last chapter that we would be covering before the midterm exam. So remember, we said that the midterm exam will cover the first 4 chapters. So this is the last chapter that you will see before the midterm exam. And after that, then you can forget about all the 4 chapters because you will not see them in the final. Okay, tariffs. What do we want to do about tariffs? Now, there are certain things I'm going to skip, of course. I'm not going to focus on. So the ones that we're going to focus on are tariff concept, types of tariffs, effective rate of protection. We will skip this, 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 and this. And we will go straight to tariff effects. We will look at tariff welfare effects in terms of consumer surplus and producer surplus. We will look at tariff welfare effects, looking at a small nation model. Then we will look at the tariff welfare effects using a large nation model. Then we will look at examples of some US tariffs, how a tariff burdens exporters, tariffs and the poor, and then we will look at some, not all, arguments for trade restrictions. We will probably skip this one, but if we have time, I'll probably just go very, very quickly on what is meant by the political economy of protectionism. That's it. That's the end of the chapter. So basically, you know, the things that we're going to be talking about are simply those that I just mentioned. Okay. Question? All right. So let's look at tariffs. And here what we're interested in basically is, first of all, what are tariffs and why do governments impose tariffs? What is the purpose of tariffs? And what are the different types of tariffs available for governments to impose? And what is the economic effect of tariffs? In other words, what are the welfare effects of tariffs? What do tariffs lead to? What would they cause in terms of welfare effects? That's basically.
So tariff is basically like to pay a premium for a good sending to another country.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. It's simply a tax imposed on a good that we import from other countries. That's what a tariff means. We will talk about that in just a minute. The first thing that we need to look at is we need to look at a trade spectrum. In other words, at one end, we have free trade, and at the other end, we have autarky. So that's basically the spectrum that we want to look at. Two extremes, free trade on one hand, autarky on the other hand. Open economy on one hand, closed economy at the other hand, on the other extreme. Now, policymakers obviously have a choice to make. Where do they want to position themselves? Do they want to position themselves right here at the extreme of the spectrum, trade spectrum? Or do they want to position themselves right here at the end of the trade spectrum? In other words, do they want to see their economies to be an autarky economy? Or do they want to see their economies as an open market economy? This is a choice that policymakers ultimately have to make. Now, if you look at the real world, you can hardly find a country that is defined by being a perfectly open market economy, nor an economy that is perfectly defined by being an autarky. So most economies of the world happens to be somewhere between these two ends. If you look at the US, developed economies, industrialized economies, rich economies, you will find them positioned somewhere here. On the other hand, if you look at less developed countries, poor countries, you will find them positioned right here. And then if you look at emerging economies, you will find them positioned right here. So you see here, you have a wide spectrum of countries who would want to determine where they want to be on that particular spectrum. Now, obviously, as we said before, there are costs and there are benefits associated with free trade. Globalization, in fact, was the result, basically, or the culmination, if I want to call it that, of free trade. Countries trading with one another, not only in goods and services, but in ideas, in culture, in views, in whatever it is. That's what has culminated in globalization. In other words, the world becoming smaller as a result. As the former foreign secretary of the US, Hillary Clinton, once said that the world is becoming a village. That's what it is. That right now we're pretty much doing exactly the same thing, consuming the same goods, paying pretty much the same price, etc., etc., etc. Using the same technology, using similar production methods. And this is sometimes, you know, it's in the international trade literature, is referred to as the flat world. The world is being flat. You know what that means? When we talk about flat world in international trade, anyone? That means there are no differences anymore between countries. It's a flat world, basically. So there are no differences in competitive advantage, there are no differences in taste, there are no differences in preferences, there are no differences in technology. It's a flat world. Anyway, so there are costs and there are benefits to trade and to globalization, of course. And because of this, you will always have some segments of society that will stand against trade. And the reason is simply because trade tends to harm them financially, economically, etc. And they will do whatever in their power to influence policymakers to try and erect barriers to trade. Trade unions, for example, may be harmed from trade. Import competing companies may be harmed from trade. So all of these segments will try to influence policymakers to impose tariffs on all imports so as to protect their very well-being. But there are others that may be harmed by such policies. Consumers, for example, may be harmed because these policies will bring increased prices on all goods and services that we consume. Trade barriers may introduce retaliation by other countries to do exactly the same thing. So those firms in the US who happen to be exporting goods to the rest of the world will no longer be exporting the same amount of goods. They will be hurt. So you can see there are two sides to the argument. What economists are trying to say here is that what we should be interested in is the gains from trade. In other words, what is the net benefit? Do benefits outweigh the cost? If so, then we have gains from trade. If benefits do not outweigh the cost, then we don't have gains from trade. So according to economists, this is exactly the basis on which you need to formulate trade policies. Policymakers, on the other hand, are pretty much torn between the global efficiency that may be acquired as a result of globalization and free trade and the needs of the voting public who happen to be harmed from trade. So what are policymakers ought to do in this case? Does everyone follow the logic and the reasoning here of what we're saying? Any questions so far? Okay, so let's continue then. One thing that you have to remember is that tariffs, just like taxes, are very inefficient. They cause inefficiency. Therefore, as an economist, you would not want to see tariffs nor taxes being imposed on goods and services. That's why economic liberalization tries to promote non-government intervention. It tries to promote the smooth flow of goods and services and distributions in all markets whenever possible. Now, going back to tariffs and what tariffs are. First of all, a tariff is nothing but a tax that is levied on a product when it enters national boundaries. In its simplest form, that's what a tariff is. It's nothing but a tax that is placed on a product once that product enters national borders. There is also what we call an export tariff. Now, you may say, well, why would countries impose an export tariff? We thought that policymakers and governments are pretty much interested in promoting, not restricting exports. Now, if you place an export tariff, what you're doing here is you're restricting exports. So is this a good idea or a bad idea? And the answer, of course, it's a bad idea to restrict either imports or exports. You don't want to do that. So why do you think governments would impose a tariff on exports? Well, for many reasons. One of the reasons why governments may want to impose a tariff on export is simply because if that exported good happens to be a strategic good that the country does not want to see exported. Now, number one. Number two, it's very possible for the country to impose an export tariff because it wants to maintain low domestic prices of that product. Because once that product is being exported, it would lead to an increase in domestic price of that product. A lot of poor people may not be able to afford to purchase that product anymore. So this is basically some of the reasons. Now I know that the US basically placed a ban on the export of oil. And the reason why the US wanted to do that was because the US wanted to accumulate its strategic reserves of oil to its max and wanted to make sure that they will never be short of oil. So they wanted to keep their oil storages well replenished. And it was only about, I believe, 7 or 8 years ago that this ban was lifted. But before that, the ban was in place. And also, it's very important to note that export tariffs are illegal under US Constitution. Okay, let's move forward. Again, there are two purposes for why a country may impose tariffs. One may be for protective purposes, and the other one may be for revenue purposes. Now, the protective purpose, of course, here is simply to protect domestic producers from foreign competition. And this is basically the more widespread use of tariffs. to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. There is also another purpose, which is revenue tariff. Governments impose tariffs for the purpose of generating tax revenues. But you see this happen a lot amongst poorer, less developed countries than you will see it happen in richer, industrialized, developed countries. So again, you have them right there, two purposes for why you want to impose a tariff. Protective, revenue. And here's just some examples of countries to see where or how much their government revenues happen to consist of tariffs. So you can see a country like the Bahamas, for example, 43% of their government revenues comes from tariff revenues, which is very high. Similar, other developing countries like Ethiopia, Liberia, Bangladesh, etc., they're in the double digits. But when you look at more advanced countries, like Austria, for example, is that Austria or Australia? I think it's Australia. I think we better enlarge that. I can see it myself. So yeah, so Australia, 1.8%. Japan, 1.7%. The US, 1.2%. Switzerland, 1%. Norway, 0.3 of 1%, etc. So you can see from here that tax revenues as a source of government revenue happens to be very minimal for advanced countries versus poor countries. Okay, now let's look at the type of tariffs. We have specific tariffs, we have ad valorem tariffs, and we have compound tariffs. So there are three types of tariffs. Specific tariff simply refers to a fixed amount of money that is imposed on a particular good. Let's say, for example, we say that we're going to impose a $500 tariff on imported cars. That's a specific tariff, $500 on imported cars, $100 on computers, $50 on TV sets, etc. All of these are specific tariffs. That's what we mean by specific tariff. Fixed amount of money, basically. How about ad valorem? Well, ad valorem tariff is different. Here we're not talking about a specific, but we're talking about a fixed percentage of the value of the imported product. Let's say, for example, we happen to impose a 15% tariff on cars imported. Now this makes a difference. Why? Because a huge difference between a specific and ad valorem. Because if you're using ad valorem and you're saying you're imposing 15% tariff on imported cars, this would mean that if you are importing, let's say, a Mercedes-Benz that has a high value versus a Toyota that has a much lower value, then the 15% that you are imposing on both of these cars is going to lead to the importers to paying completely different amounts. That's ad valorem. So ad valorem deals with percentages of the value of the product imported. It's not looking at specific anymore. Fixed percentage, whether it's 15%, 10%, 5%, whatever.
Would duty be the same thing as tariff duty?
What's that?
Duty, is that the same thing as a tariff? Duty on a product or?
Yeah, tariff duty, it means the same thing.
Okay.
A tax, a duty, all of them mean the same, no difference.
Okay.
Okay, now we come to the third type. So we looked at specific tariff, we know what it is. We looked at ad valorem tariff, and we also know what it is. Now we want to look at the compound tariff. The compound tariff is nothing but a combination of a specific and an ad valorem tariff. For example, a country may impose a compound tariff on cars, such as it will say that we're going to impose a $200 tariff on cars plus 2.5% ad valorem. So here you have a $200 specific tariff plus 2.5% ad valorem tariff. This will constitute a compound tariff. That simply means we're using a combination of both specific and ad valorem to come up with a compound tariff. This is basically, in a nutshell, what you need to know, just the differences between them. That's about it. Now, if we look at the average import tariff rates for selected countries, you will see that the Bahamas probably has the highest from these countries, of course. 28%. Let's look at the average tariff imposed by China, 7.8%. Canada, 3.2. US, 2.7. Japan, 2.4. Germany, 1.6. So you can see countries do have different tariff rates imposed on their imports. Some happen to have a very large rate. Others happen to have a very low tariff rate on the average. And this is, of course, according to World Bank data. So it's not something that I created myself. This is something that, the World Bank was able to come up with these numbers for 2013. And all of these are percentages. Okay, we're gonna keep it right there because we're running out of time. And if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Anyone with questions?
Yeah, so to reiterate, homework's due tonight at 11:59?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Actually, I also had a question about the homework. So on titanium, it says that homework number 4 is still due October 13th, but then it says that homework number 3 is due October 15th.
No, I made the changes. I made the changes already. I don't know why you're not seeing the changes.
Okay, because I just checked like at the beginning of class.
No, I made the changes. And what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a screenshot and show it to all of you.
Oh, okay.
The changes are there. I don't know why you're seeing different dates. I have no idea, but I made all the changes up to homework 4.
Oh, okay.
I have not gone beyond homework 4, but I will make the changes subsequently. So don't worry.
Okay. I think that was like my main question because like it does show that homework 3 was changed from I think like today. I think was like the original date for it, but I was just like questioning about homework number 4 just because it was due before, but if you haven't changed it, then that makes sense. So
Yeah, that will be changed, and I will make sure, I will go over it and make sure that everything has been updated. Any other?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I turned in my second homework today, and it says it's past due, like it's late.
No, keep giving. You cannot submit it?
Yes, I did it, and it said that it's late. I thought it was today at midnight.
No, there won't be any points taken off.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, don't worry about that. So just submit it. I
Okay,
mean,
yes, I did.
sometimes, even if you are 1 day late, that's okay. Just keep submitted. I'm not going to take any points off as long as you have submitted it, even if it's, 1 day.
Because it said Tuesday at midnight, and I thought it was this midnight, not Monday midnight. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it should be Tuesday. I don't know why it has it as Monday. For what? I don't understand. I mean,
Yeah, I thought it was Tuesday, 11:59 p.m.
Yeah.
But then I didn't read it was 12 a.m.
I don't know why. I mean, that's really stupid because it says, the date. It gives you the date, which is, let's say, the 6th. Let's say, for example, I put the 6th. And it asks me for the time. And I put the time as, 12 midnight. Then that should be, I guess, and that's why.
I think you should put 11:59
Yeah,
p.m.
I put 11:59 p.m. That's exactly what you should have. 11:59.
We have midnight.
It says 12 a.m. on there.
Okay. So
Yeah.
maybe we gotta go back and check these things out and make sure that they are okay. But just don't worry about it. Even if you're 1 day late, no problem. Just submit it. And
Okay, I'll give it to you today.
Yeah, you will not be penalized.
Okay.
As long as all the homework is in before I go over it, you're fine. Once I go over it, then that's a different story.
No, I'm just having lots of anxiety this week, a lot of submissions and exams, so I just got scared.
No, don't worry about it. No, always, even if you're a couple of days late, that's okay. No problem. Don't worry about it. As long as I said, we didn't go over it, because once we go over it, then that's it.
Okay. So once you review it, that's it. It's done.
Exactly. Otherwise, submit it anytime. I have to put, of course, a date for you, but between you and me, it's fine. Just keep on submitting as long as before the day that we go over the homework. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions?
No.
Okay.
Thank you,
Actually, by tariffs, I'll just give you a little thing of mine. Like my cousins, I think in their country, getting the iPhone is more expensive. Is it because of the tariff or?
Yeah, tariffs.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, someone else had a question? Okay, the number of participants seem to be dwindling, so that means everyone is leaving right now. Anyone has anything before I close?
No.
Okay. All right, so I guess I'll see you on, I'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.